Hi, boys and girls, it's Mrs. Backeberg, and we're continuing your study with traditional literature. As you could tell by the first couple of screens, today our focus is going to be on fables. And as the first couple of slides showed, a fable is when they use animal characters to teach some type of a lesson, or there's some type of moral for the reader to learn. Well, I wanted to talk a little bit about Aesop's fables. Most of you have probably heard of Aesop. Sometimes they pronounce it Aesop. And I thought there was some really interesting history about Aesop first that I wanted to share with you, so I wanted to read a little bit of that to you. Aesop was a slave who lived in Greece about 3,000 years ago. He became famous for the clever animal fables through which he showed the wise and foolish behavior of men. It says not much is really known about the life of Aesop. It is said that his wisdom so delighted one of his masters that as a slave he was given freedom because of this. It is said too that he became an honored guest at the courts of kings. Aesop's fables have become a part of our daily language. It's a way of expressing ourselves. You've probably heard people talk about sour grapes or not counting your chickens until they're hatched. Those all come from some of his fables. Aesop never even wrote down his stories. He told them to people who in turn told them to others. And I know that when we talked about traditional literature with Mrs. Schuneman, she talked about that oral tradition being passed on from one person to the next. Not until actually 200 years after he died, 200 years, did the first collection of his fables start to appear. Since then, they have been translated into almost every language in the world. That's amazing. Today, there are so many versions of the tales that Aesop first told in the hills of Greece so long ago. So boys and girls, because the fables are a little bit different than the tall tales, the legends, the fairy tales you've been reading, a lot of Aesop's fables are short, just a couple of minutes. And most of them, or all of them end with some kind of moral or lesson. So what I wanted to start with is on the next slide, you actually have the tortoise and the hare video. Again, most of you have heard of this. Most of you have read the book. My guess is most of it was probably a story told to you, passed down, just like it first originally was. So take just a couple of minutes to remind yourself as you watch the video of the tortoise and the hare, and be thinking about who are the characters, what's the problem and solution. And at the end, like I mentioned earlier, they always tell that moral, that lesson. So you'll watch the video, and then on the next slide, I am going to be reading you another one of Aesop's fables.